St. Anselm of Canterbury was an 11th century monk who strongly believed in the use of reason in service of theology. As a matter of fact, he held reason in such high regard that he attempted to formulate an argument for the existence of God based purely upon reason. It eventually came to be known as the Ontological Argument. Anselm's argument was based on pure reason. It's not based on any empirical evidence. It's what's called a priori. With most arguments, you can challenge whether the evidence from the so-called real world supports the premises. One of the premises from the cosmological argument, for example, says the universe began to exist. People can debate whether or not what we see in the universe actually supports the idea that the universe had a beginning. But a priori arguments are different. They don't depend upon any input from the outside world. Anselm attempts to argue from the mere idea of God to the conclusion that God therefore must exist. Now, scholars hotly dispute whether he actually succeeded, to say the least. Even using the term ontological argument may be a bit of a misnomer, because in his work, the Proslogion, Anselm actually advanced two slightly different versions. Now, over the next several episodes, we're going to take a good look at each of Anselm's varieties, along with a modern variation proposed by Alvin Plantinga, the theologian we've been talking about who created the evolutionary argument against naturalism and the argument from proper function. And the first variation of Anselm's argument comes from chapter 2 of his work, and it's based upon the idea of God as the most perfect being conceivable. A Christian apologist, Douglas Groothuis, summarizes Anselm's first argument like this. Premise 1. God is understood or defined as a being that which nothing greater can be conceived. Premise 2. A thing exists either in A, the understanding only, or B, in both the understanding and reality. Premise 3. It is greater to exist in reality than to exist merely in the understanding. Premise 4. If God exists merely in the understanding, then God is not the greatest possible being, since a being that existed in reality would be greater than a being that existed only in the understanding. Premise 5. But God is by definition the greatest possible being. Conclusion. Therefore, God exists not merely in the understanding, but in reality as well. So in essence, Anselm is saying that if we can envision the greatest possible being, then that being must exist, because otherwise it wouldn't be the greatest possible being. It's always greater to exist than to not exist. Anselm gives an example to illustrate what he means by something merely existing in the understanding versus existing in reality. He says, when a painter first conceives of what he will afterwards perform, he has it in his understanding, but he does not yet understand it to be, because he has not yet performed it. But after he has made the painting, he both has it in his understanding, and he understands that it exists, because he has made it. So it's possible for the painting to exist in his understanding before he actually paints it. But after he paints it, it exists both in his understanding and in reality. So that's how Anselm explained the first variation of his ontological argument. Now next week, we're going to take a look at how Immanuel Kant responded to it. See you then. God bless.